Good afternoon, and thank you for joining us in the final session of the day. This is on the safety and the risk in the digital economy. I'm Kenneth Kuki. I'm the data editor of The Economist and the co-author of the book Big Data. I'm joined by Andy Wyckoff. Andrew Wyckoff is the director of the Science, Technology, and Industry Division of the OECD. Welcome. Thank you. Eric Boustudier is the corporate vice president and area vice president for Microsoft Western Europe. Eric, thank you. Good. Gus Hussein is the executive director of Privacy International. Very good. And Peter Hoostinks is the European Data Protection Supervisor. Peter, thank you. And Sarah Spiekerman is the Professor of Information Systems and the Chair of the Institute for Management Information Systems at Vienna University of Economics and Business. Hello, Sarah. We're going to hear from Andrew, who's going to give an overview to set the theme of today's session, and then we're going to have a conversation on the stage, and then open it up to the audience as well as to the internet community through a system called Wissembly, which I have here and which you are able to interact with on a smartphone or on a tablet computer by asking us questions in real time that we can then bring into the conversation without interrupting the flow of it. Andrew, please start us off.
Thanks, Ken, and good afternoon to everyone. Thank you for coming. It's great to see so many of you here. This session is framed as safety and risk in the digital economy, but the description is really oriented around privacy questions and the emergence of what we call data-driven economies and societies. The objective of this session is at least twofold. The first is cognizant of the breadth of intellect residing in the room, and especially also on the panel. I look forward to you helping us unpack what I think are very complex and interconnected issues and help us begin to identify policy priorities. The second objective, let's see if I can make this work. Hang on. Okay. The second objective is to harvest your ideas as input into the OECD work streams in this area. These include privacy guidelines, which were revised just last year in July, cybersecurity guidelines that are undergoing review as we speak, and both of these feed into the 2011 Internet Policy-Making Principles agreed to in December of that year. These principles will be one of the focal points of the 2016 Digital Economy Ministerial Meeting that will occur in Mexico. So let me set the scene, and before doing so, does anyone mind if my colleague Michael takes photographs? Okay, good. Because I want to start with cameras. And just to point out that the interplay of technology, data, and privacy is not new. In fact, the issues have been with us at least since the late 1800s, when George Eastman's development of the portable camera, Louis Brandeis, here's Louis, writing in the Harvard Law Review in 1890 with Samuel Warren, became the first major article to advocate for the legal right to privacy. I just want to quote one sentence, because it could have been written this week. Recent inventions and business models call attention to the next step, which must be taken for the protection of the person and for securing for the individual the right to be let alone. Now, my ploy of asking Michael to take your picture is to underscore that the point that our notions of privacy are dynamic and not static. And of course, data has been misused to undermine security in our parents' generation, both in World War II and the Cold War, which provides, along with other historical references, some context for the national and regional differences in the protection of personal privacy we see today. But hype aside, it is clear that starting around 2010, we have moved into a new era dubbed big data. The advance is made possible by the steep decline in the cost of storage. Consequently, virtually all information, text, pictures, video, sounds, data are now digitally stored, and we witness what The Economist calls a data deluge, in the emergence of an era of big data, what Ken calls in his book, datification of everything. There's been a profound, just fundamental change in scale in the amount of data going through various networks and being used, both in terms of volume, the value of it, and the role of data analytics. And you can see the amount of data going up has been tremendous, especially since 2010. And let me tell you, this is just the beginning. Many of these trends are likely to accelerate as we further embrace what's called the ambient computing environment, what some call the Internet of Things, machine-to-machine communications, as everything gets tagged, everything from cows to cars. It's estimated that 1.4 billion connected devices are in OECD homes as I speak right now, and firms such as like Ericsson projected this will be 50 billion by the end of the decade. And with all this data being thrown off by these sensors and things that we post on Facebook and terms that we enter into, like Google search, new businesses are born. And where these business models now fundamentally depend on the use of users' personal data in exchange for the service. Now, Google search is probably the best known here. Hal Varians, their chief economist, he estimates that the average search on Google would take a skilled researcher librarian about 20 minutes to complete. And we get these responses back in a matter of seconds in exchange for our keywords and probably some targeted advertising that many of us are willing to make that exchange. The question arises, how many users out there that are engaging in this exchange know that they're really giving their personal information in exchange for this service? In any event, this is just the beginning. We can expect to see many more business models of this type. I've just picked one here, a really neat. It's called Waze. It's kind of a sophisticated GPS built on cell phone traffic and social network information that's incredibly useful. There's a huge variety of very powerful applications that can dramatically improve our social well-being. I'm just going to pick one here. The G8, a group not known to be prone to hype, when they were meeting last December, launched an initiative on using big data to better understand, diagnose, and treat dementia, which will be a disease that affects, unfortunately, too many of us going forward. And the potential economic benefits from this data are huge. It's got people, everyone from my Secretary General in 2008, who called personal data the new currency of the internet economy, to others calling it the new oil. And you can just see from the McKinsey report here, there's a number of very large potential gains we can make, both in terms of productivity, but also what's called kind of consumer welfare, things that don't show up necessarily in our productivity statistics, but help our everyday life. Now, I'm just going to end here drawing out just some of the implications for policy, and these are legion, and I'm just going to pick from three sources. The first is Ken's book on big data, which I highly recommend. It is a great book. The second is an article in Foreign Affairs written by the senior advisor to the CEO of Microsoft, Craig Mundy. And the last just came out this weekend, and it's from the PCAST, or the John Podesta report to the US president on big data. One of the questions that comes out is, what is personal data in 2014? And privacy concepts and regimes are based on this, but data analytics make it possible to infer personal information from non-personal data such as metadata, which has famously been the heart of some of the NSA scandal. This has made the art of data anonymization nearly impossible, says President Obama's report. But this doesn't mean that there isn't a role for de-identification. Even if it can't be perfect, this can maybe go a long way to offering practical protections. Now, this begins to beg the question of how much protection we need and whether we need it to extend to our privacy. Then there's a question of power of inference. What is identity? Many of you are aware possibly of this famous story in the United States where through looking at purchasing information, Target was able to predict not only whether you were pregnant, but whether or not what trimester you were in, and target advertising to you. The problem is, in this case, they targeted it to the father of the girl who hadn't told the father yet. But this kind of brings in the question of concept of identity, and again, the use of metadata, and it challenges many of our regulations that are based on a particular notion of declared identity. Let me go to the issue of security. This is a famous photo of Willie Sutton. Willie Sutton's most well known for his quote, "Willie, why do you rob banks?" And he said, well, that's where the money is. Well, we should expect the same of data. And in fact, you're beginning to see it. Last year, a harbinger of things to come, Target again. The third largest retailer had a data breach that affected nearly 70 million customers. Following the breach, Target reduced its fourth quarter earnings forecast by 20%. And just today, the CEO resigned, mainly because of falling prospects with the firm associated with this data breach. In Korea, a major breach involved 3 Korean credit card companies that affected 20 million individuals. Fourth, how has big data forced a shift in where personal data should be protected? Given the way the internet is evolving with social networks and the consent and the growth of Internet of Things, is it practical to have individuals consent to their collection of their data? Or does it make more sense, as Craig Mundy of Microsoft suggests, to push back the point of permission to the analysis of where this data occurs? And if yes, is this a slippery slope? With that, let me end and turn to the panel and some discussion questions, which I'm not going to go over, but I may just leave up on the screen to prompt some of the discussion. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Andy. Thank you very much. They're no longer on the screen. Because they're no longer on the screen, why don't we go back to them? Just let me read them very quickly, just so they can hover over us like the sword of Damocles that if we do anything wrong, we get impaled by. So the first one is, given the volume of personal data collected by organizations, what measures can be taken to improve the management of privacy and security risk? What is the role of accountability? How much responsibility can we place on individuals? What is the role of consent in the age of big data? Shouldn't we shift privacy protection from the point of data collection to the point of data analysis? Of course, because the whole point of big data is to use the data in the future in ways that were never anticipated at the time of the original collection. Third, should certain uses of personal data be authorized to facilitate a societal good, for example, medical research? And let me actually strengthen that to say, should citizens be obligated to share their personal data as a condition of either medical service in public healthcare systems, or as a simple matter of law and a condition of citizenship, that just as you have to have a birth certificate, have to have a marriage certificate, have to have a death certificate, you have to share your data, okay? And then fourth, given the global nature of the internet and the enormous volumes of data that crosses borders, do national or regional approaches to the regulation of privacy make sense? Now, before we unpack some of these questions, let me get a sense of the temperature of the room by using the Wissembly system. Now, the organizers don't know that I was planning on doing this, so I'm now alerting you I'm doing this. Let us bring up the survey questions that you have, and I'd like to just get a sense of what everyone thinks. You can vote, and I'm going to tell you what the questions are. I'll read it to you right now. You can send us the questions and comments. That the hashtag that was just below me a second ago has now disappeared. What we might do, if this doesn't seem to be effective in the language of statistics, if the N isn't large enough, is we'll just do a show of hands, and you can abstain if you think that you want to protect your privacy and how you answer. Here is the question. In the age of big data, the collection of individual personal data is 1, worth the potential negative consequences because the benefits are just so great, or two, brings with it too much risk for individual privacy for too little return. All those in favor of going for it, using it as much as possible, collect it all, as a famous American official once said, press 1. Those of you who are a little bit more reluctant to see that we go forward without the suitable safeguards, say 2. After you've done that, why don't we do a show of hands, and just to get a sense of the temperature of the room, who is in favor of Proposition 1? Let's go forward because there's so many great benefits. Raise your hand. Okay. Those of you who aren't quite so sure, let's use the precautionary principle. Let's restrain ourselves at the outset. Raise your hand. Number 2. Okay, so it's close. I would say it's 60-40. 60-40, okay. I'm going to ask the question at the end to see if anyone changes. Actually, I'll just see who changes their perspectives at the end. Where are we going to start? Peter, you've heard a lot of these presentations. You've heard the pros and cons for years. What do you make of all this?
Well, the environment is so dynamic, it's obvious that therefore we have to rethink the way we deal with privacy protection. And that's exactly the reason why, say, the OECD recently revised its framework. The EU is doing it, the Council of Europe is doing it, and other organizations doing it. But guess what? It's not happening to do away with it, to make it work better. That's what I would buy into. The emphasis in the revised frameworks, and OECD as an example, is on accountability, implementation, and yes, also enforcement. There is very little change in the substance of the principles which have been applying in this domain. So I would think that in spite of all the dynamics, and let's take big data as an example, it would still be wise to make sure there is end-to-end coverage. That is, start with collection and work to the end. And then maybe deal with the reality in a more creative way. That is most certainly, in my view, not by saying we're concentrate only at the end, forget collection, concentrate on use. And I would mention that in any case in Europe, we've been much more sophisticated on the conceptual level and the principle level. The whole idea of what is personal data is being solved, is being solved in conceptual level in the 80s and the 90s, and it certainly includes what was referred to as metadata. Much of this is about people and their devices moving. So that's not a distinction which would work. And also the question of, is it legitimate, does not depend on consent only. We have already had for a long time alternatives, and I think we should make them work better. And as well ask some balances of interest, legitimate interest. So I do not buy into, since 2010, big data, get out of the way because the gold is streaming. No. I turn it around to make sure that we can benefit from these wonderful things. We have to make sure that protections are included. And then to close, there is certainly a big distinction to be made in big data between what you might refer to as knowledge discovery, going for interesting things in an analytical way, and applying them to individuals. And the accountability needs to be built in. There needs to be a strong distinction between the knowledge discovery part and the applying the formulas found. We'll come back to the details.
Okay. If I understood what you said, you were saying that most of the conceptual work in terms of protecting privacy were solved in the 80s. Is that right?
That's where the basis was created. What we're doing now is very innovative, but it is not changing those fundamentals. See the OECD guidelines, which were revised just recently. It's not changing the fundamentals, it's applying it. The creativity comes in terms of how you allocate incentives, positives and negative incentives, how you organize full cycle data management in organizations. Many organizations are not so good in managing data, in spite of all the busy, buzzy words. There is a huge vulnerability. We need to make huge progress in better data management, in also then delivering the rights and the protections people want. They want to have trust. That's why you need to invest in good protections.
Okay. So although we're in a new era of big data, you don't think that there's anything fundamentally different in the way that we're using data that forces us to reassess some of these things? Some of these questions.
I'm reassessing this on a permanent basis. Huh?
Okay.
So I'm not saying this is not cast in stone. But for this debate, there is much more continuity in the fundamentals than many would think.
Okay.
Yeah.
Let me get another vote from the audience before I turn up to the panel. And the vote is this. How many people here think that privacy rules work? Versus how many people just, and I'm not saying law, I'm not saying legislation, just how many people, what I'm getting at is who feels that the current framework for protecting privacy does what it is intended to do, that you feel secure that your privacy is protected. And I'm going to, or versus those who feel like there's a great lacuna and it doesn't work. So who here generally feels that privacy rules work? Raise your hand. Okay, there's 1, 2, okay. Who here generally feels, just getting a temperature of the time, that actually privacy rules don't work? Raise your hand. Okay, so there's essentially, it's unanimous. Okay, we have taken the temperature of the room. Who would like to build on Peter and Andy's remarks and flesh out these issues? Sarah.
I would, oops. Yes, I would very much like to do that, and I would like to start out with a general question on what big data actually is. Because you're being asked now questions on a term that is called big data, and everybody thinks that's something you have to know about. And the thing is, it is a hype cycle umbrella term on the top of Gartner's hype cycle curve. And so I'm wondering, I mean, I'm sorry, I'm from academia and I'm maybe a little bit stricter on how to use words. So for me, it's a big data, not only for me, it's a fact. It's an umbrella term that embraces technologies like mobile, RFID, sensor technology, all kinds of internet technologies. So it's like bringing together horses, locomotives, cars, so basically everything that's out there where we can sit on somehow and that brings us forward. If we invented a term for that, we could call it, I don't know, transportation. And I would now provocatively say big data is about on that level. So, since this is a fact, I don't have to make a judgment. I'm just wondering, when you discuss brakes, yeah, perhaps a brake in a car is something different than a brake on a horse. So, I don't like asking the audience in this context, do you actually want to have brakes in general? And do you think they work? I'm very sorry if I'm so provocative, but since something like a human right is actually at stake, and since there are so many interests about getting rid of our human rights, like the one called consent and called informational self-determination, and informational self-determination meaning human dignity in the face of machines. I'm very sorry to be so critical.
That's great, but allow me to build on it, because in your in your sense of being provocative, I have a feeling like you're pulling your punches. You're simply criticizing the approach with which I've been sort of flushing out these issues, but not making a positivistic statement. And you got to it at the end by saying that this is about matter of dignity and privacy. Continue.
Yes, I can continue because I deeply believe in the power of human beings. And I think right now we are still in a kindergarten of the information age. And I think we will develop a lot in the future. We will have robotics around, drones around, and a lot of rich information sources. And somehow we have to figure out how to manage them, and people will learn. And there is a young generation coming out that are very computer affine. And I think that the privacy protection software that is now in the pipelines, over 300 startups that are working on privacy enhancing technologies. These companies will make it for people so easy to give consent and so easy to handle their privacy. It's just like eating and sleeping. And we will have that technology around in a few years from now. And I think what we have to work on now is to make this new technology and this user-centric control of data possible and make it fly.
Okay. I see an inherent hiccup with this panel, which is, it is true that I'm a great promoter of the use of data. However, as a moderator, I have to be even-handed to flesh out these issues. And I revealed my hand by challenging Peter at the outset. So why don't we do this? Let's hear from the other panelists and build on that. And then if I feel like the positivistic sides of using big data are not being sort of upheld to what I consider the satisfactory position, I'll leave my neutrality or impartiality and take a more positivistic role and address your points. How's that? Good. Let me turn, before you, Eric, let me turn to Gus and ask, as someone who's looking at...
I was ready, but...
I know you're ready.
That's okay. That's okay.
I've got a reason why, because I want to build on to this point that there is a slew of privacy-enhancing technologies that are waiting in the wings, that if we just give it a few years, we will be able to strike the right balance and actually preserve human dignity and preserve human privacy. Gus, do you think that that's right?
What I love about this domain is that every day it's a damn struggle. And it's an exciting and interesting struggle. Are there technologies in the wait for a significant amount of the problem? Yes, but not for everything. But it does point to this this issue very well, and that is we are fetishizing innovation. We are calling big data the innovation that we must all just greet like our new alien overlords. And this technology is just going to wash over us, and anybody who's opposed to it doesn't understand technology. A number of people on the stage understand technology very well, and they understand that innovation works in many different ways. And so what Sarah was talking about was a different form of innovation. But lo and behold, the one that we are told is inevitable is big data that is supported by the big institutions. It is supported by, as Ken alluded to, the National Security Agency that says we must collect everything. It is supported by Google and Microsoft because they can monetize it. I would love to see this level of support for the technologies that empower individuals, but we're not seeing that innovation. We're not discussing that innovation in these halls. We're not saying the future is based on empowering individuals. We're talking about how the future is based on data that will inform governments and companies to make more money and to make better widgets and to make decisions about us.
Okay, problem established. Do you think that the technologies actually exist that give it the innovation cycle and over time that in 2, 3, 4 years that there will be meaningful technological solutions to some of the problems we're identifying today?
To a large extent, not a full extent, as I said, yes. Microsoft, the company represented right beside me, has developed technologies that allow you to control when information is shared about you and what level of identification actually exudes from your devices and from your, say, your wallets. Lo and behold, Microsoft's actually the worst salesman of this technology, and governments around the world don't want to buy it. Why? Well, because they want to use technologies that amass as much information as possible, as opposed to the more interesting and actually secure techniques that Microsoft and other companies have had the opportunity to build.
Okay. Eric.
No, I like, they are promoters of what we do, so I mean,
Good.
it's a good handover, if I can say so. So maybe to set the scene, I'm going more from the business angle. So you were sorry to come from the academia, so I'm sorry to speak from the half of the business. As a business guy, I will look, at the glass more half full than half empty. So I will be more on the positive side. So I have to convince at least 60% of the room here that there is more to, I would say, there are more benefits than risk and challenging, while saying and acknowledging that there are risks and challenges, for sure. And we need to work, in constant dialogue, all stakeholders, to build that new environment where people, I would say consumers or I would say citizens, as much as governments, companies, be it small or large, or whatever, all over the world, be as certain that their data will be, I would say, will respect total confidentiality, where they will get the right security, and so on and so forth. So we are inventing that new world. And we need to, and I'm glad that the OECD is, putting that, topic, in its agenda to help progress, not only the debate, but hopefully the legal framework that is going to help us, build that environment. There is a lot to gain, from whatever you call it. It is not just big data, by the way, because the trends, it's mobile, it's social, it's a cloud, it's certainly big data, but it's a combination of things. Having been in this business, and this industry for 30 years plus now, I can tell you these revolutions are faster and coming in the same time. So it's a new world that we are creating or seeing, and it's coming live, for us. So it's a shock that we are, let's say, kind of contemplating now. Lots of benefits for governments. I mean, through open data kind of solutions, it's inventing new services for citizens all over the place, while lowering their costs, reducing their debts. It's a huge opportunity. Fueling, when it comes to health and the patient record that we know very, very well, that's been around for 10 years and more. But now it's fueling, the discoveries in new medicines and so on and so forth. Fantastic benefits for businesses. For businesses, it's, also, building a sort of, more balance between the large and the small companies, because then they can do as much while being a small company. So, and they can go abroad. So let me now tell you, that yes, we need that dialogue, but what are companies like Microsoft doing on technology? But not only on technology. Really building that environment. And we are learning, because it's a new world. So we are all learning. We have to be very, very humble while being determined to make something happen. So recently we have made, I would say, declaration in a big trust in the cloud initiative that has been launched. Part of that initiative, we've taken, I would say, a bigger step when it comes to encryption. Data encryption in the data centers, encryption between the data center as the data transit. The second thing is when it comes to transparency. We are giving total transparency to our source code when it comes to our data center and the technology that are in our data center. Anyone can have access, to that information. 3, when it comes to also, information that law enforcement or any authority would solicit from Microsoft, we are super clear. It has to be a legal order, otherwise we don't give the information. And then we can give this information. We have also taken, new initiatives when it comes to, let's say, legal regulations or let's say regional regulation around the world. Recently, you have certainly read in the press, big digital or print, that Microsoft has been awarded by the Article 29 committee about respecting and complying with the so-called model clauses when it comes to data privacy. So what did it take for Microsoft to do it? Not to be a spectator, but a real player, and to adapt our contracts to this model clause, which respect new data privacy.
Okay.
And on and on and on. So technology can help, but also taking measures. And it's just the beginning of the beginning. So I'm not saying that it's over. No, we have a lot to do.
So the problem with big data versus privacy is that an actor like Microsoft or any large company has a great interest in abiding by the rules. In fact, I'm sure cynics might say, well, they shape the rules as well, but nevertheless, abiding by the rules, we need stringent rules not for good actors like yourself, but for the least visible, the least under pressure actors who have the greatest incentive to disobey the rules. Hence, although we can congratulate and applaud the great work you've done, we still would need very stringent rules for the people who are not you, who we don't know about, the free apps that are willing to violate our children's privacy because they can get away with it. Peter, it looks like you want to walk in.
I want to do justice to Microsoft, but it's necessary to also mention that the Article 29 Working Party has published an important footnote to make sure that the recognition is not extrapolated as to apply to other things than it really applied to. If you want to know, check the website and you'll see that it addresses a part. And Eric was a bit, I think, celebrating beyond the limits of the 29th recognition. But I will come back on something.
If I just,
Gus,
and again, not to pick on Microsoft, but the same week that you got that announcement, a New York court also, despite your company trying to fight it, the New York court ordered you to abide by a warrant, or was it a subpoena? I can't remember which one actually, issued against Microsoft for data held in Ireland. So data held by Microsoft anywhere in the world is now open game for US law enforcement.
But
Can I?
yes.
Can I jump
Of course,
on this one?
yeah.
I think it's a very good point you're making, because I mean that was a first step in that kind of action that we have taken. For sure, I mean, I would say I don't know whether we have failed on this one or whether the status quo is maintained. I don't know that. What we know, and we are committed to, is to take it to a next court now. Why? Because we want to be super open and have a debate, so as to make sure that at one point in time we take the right, we all take the right decision that, the data, not necessarily in the US, but somewhere else, we are taking exactly the same actions, or the measure, or the legal, let's say, measures are the same when it comes to physical things or digital things. So it's a new world that we have to invent. So we will take it to new courts. That's where we are. We want to debate, and we will make everything possible to have this debate.
I don't want to get too much in the weeds of this, but we should explain to the people who might not know what the case is about, what the case was about. And the short version of it was that Microsoft was required by a New York court to hand over information from a web server that's hosted in Ireland, so not in the United States. They fought it, so you could say that they were acting in protection of their customers' privacy, but they lost. And so they're going to take it to the next step in fighting it, i.e. preserving privacy. However, if you think that this is a world in which criminals can act around the world, and just because it happens to be hosted in one place or another, you might argue that, in fact, it's entirely reasonable for a court to ask for information about, in a case, even if it's held overseas. Sarah.
Yeah, I also wanted to speak very positively about Microsoft, because when I meet Microsoft researchers from time to time in conferences, I hear them speaking about data management and accountability in data management. And one idea that I particularly like is the idea to store our personal information together with metadata that says to what extent a company is actually allowed to use that personal information. So there are policies stored together with the personal information in the databases. Yeah. And these policies, sometimes some researchers call them sticky policies. And these sticky policies, they actually come from us. So they come from our mobile phones and from our PC. And we may just, set in our browser, like now, very simple, do not track. We say, no, we don't want to be tracked. In the future, we can specify them in much more detail. And then this information, I don't want to be tracked, or I give you my data for XYZ money. This sticky policy is attached to the data, and it travels right into the company database, the collectors database. And there you are developing technology, as I have learned, that then comes an auditing company that looks, this company is actually allowed to have that data, to hold that data, because the customer has negotiated. That's very user-friendly. I think that's awesome because it puts users back into the picture. It allows for personal data markets. People can negotiate, and we have big data.
So it sounds like we can have absolutely everything, although there might be classes of data that should be open at the outset that people don't need to give their consent to, either because the usage of the data is eminently sensible and not that invasive, even though everything's a little bit invasive, or for other reasons as well. Andy, when you hear this debate raging forward, what do you think, having studied the issue at the OECD and looking at both sides?
I take some issue with Gus, actually. So I'm not going to directly answer your question, but the problem with the analysis here is that we can see these McKinsey-type gains for select sectors. But I think I kind of buy Eric Brynjolfsson's argument, researcher at MIT, that a lot of the gains aren't being picked up by our regular statistics because they're captured in consumer surplus, consumer welfare. And that's why Gus's comment really depresses me. And I want him to expand on it, if you'll permit me, Ken, because he seemed to indicate that this was just the providence of large businesses, that we weren't seeing individuals take advantage of this or use it for their own purposes, or even see kind of quasi-business applications spring up that really help the individual. And if you'll permit me, Ken, I just want to hear more about that.
Sorry, as a point of clarification, you want me to talk about how individuals can use big data? Because they can't. We can't collect the masses of data.
Well,
You're talking about the benefits that we may glean from big data?
I guess mainly the latter, yes. But I am aware that there increasingly, governments, for example, there's a bill in front of the U.S. Congress right now to put all the budgetary information up. And this would allow clever people, such as yourself, using open source software like R and Hadoop and others, to begin to mine this to find interesting things that could hopefully improve the governance of that country.
Absolutely. Open data is a great opportunity to improve governance, not just of a country, but globally. It gives us more information to understand what a government is doing, but also informs our own work in other advocacy domains. We're big fans of open data, and we use it to a large extent. Again, I don't like it when we conflate things. Before we conflate innovation, now we conflate open data, which everybody thinks is a common good. And for what it's worth, the open data movement likes as much as possible to stay away from personal information. And so, yeah, I want the US government to be open. I want the US government to share its budget data, but I don't want it to share my tax information.
I actually think the privacy community is very, very open to not only open data, also open data on the basis of what comes initially from people. I call this people data, but it's anonymous data. It's not personal data. There's no re-identification in it.
But the problem there is going to be what we consider anonymous data today probably won't be if we add more processing to it in the future.
Well, there is a way. There is a way. We now have very good anonymization technologies, K-anonymity, L-diversity. We have techniques to anonymize data. These techniques are advancing with the technology. So at each point in time, we will have best available techniques for anonymizing. That said, this data can still be attacked. There can be re-identification. But if you have at the same time a law that criminalizes re-identification, which was basically also in the White House report, if you have those two best available techniques on a technological level and the law, you will have anonymous data. There is still abuse, but we can never exclude abuse anywhere in life, totally. And everybody knows that.
I think we're addressing important details of the picture, but we're losing sight of the main picture. I voted with the very large majority. In fact, it was near unanimity, which said, in reply to your second question, does privacy laws work sufficiently? The answer was no. So that means, I'm in agreement with that. We urgently need to invest in making them work better. What does it require? It requires stronger rights, but also the means to exercise those rights in reality. Technology is part of that. We need to have much stronger responsibilities, accountability, sometimes liabilities. It's one, mostly for better data management. And there is a lot to be gained. We also need to make supervision arrangement, internal, external, much more effective. Now, just an important detail, this is why in the EU discussion, suddenly the proposal of €1 million fines have created great attention. Is this going to be effective, going to be relevant for us? Yes, of course. It's a boardroom issue. How you organize sufficient data management responsibility to really carry trust. Then we are redefining the scope of this system, making sure that it applies to everyone on the European market, and so forth and so on. That's a lot of innovation, a lot of creativity. And it will catch all those phenomena we were referring to, including the Internet of Things, mobile, etc. The key question is, who is responsible for what? And there you have to allocate positive and negative incentives. You cannot define this, oh, it's too complicated or it's too attractive, we're not going to do this. You need to embed safeguards in the systems you roll out, and therefore you need to have strong incentives and also positive ones. Those who do this best will have the biggest share of the market. That will in the end be, we'll see the real forces of competition law in this as well. Let me add one sentence. My office has recently published a paper on how data protection law, consumer protection, and competition policy interact. So we're getting more and more an interesting conversation. If this is gold, if this is currency, we need to have some forces to regulate. And then, of course, leave space to legitimate activities.
Okay.
And maybe to build, on that, not to go into necessarily, the details. I'm not an expert there, but from what I understand here, and what Microsoft or companies like Microsoft in particular, who I know well, we want to lead with some, let's say, creative practices. So I heard you about anonymization of data. That has been a key principle of what we do, and we've been doing for many, many years. So not only the technology does exist, but secondly, it has become a policy. So every data that is getting through our data center is anonymized from the identity of an individual and its navigation practice. So what is important for us is the navigation, and we use that. Two, and that's a clear principle where we want to set the tone, we want to set the standard for others, and that's where, for sure, there will be competition, but we want to compete and take the lead in that competition of these new policies, these new practices. Another one, we don't scan mails for any advertising purposes. So you are talking about use, we don't do it. And another point that maybe another principle maybe I can share with the audience, it's about transparency. If you want to build a world of trust, you need to be completely transparent, which is not necessarily easy to do, but you need to be transparent, and in particular on how you use it. You were talking about consent or data collection, but you could also, and that was you referred to that, Andrew, in your introduction. Usage of the data by any contenders, any stakeholder, is something that should be published, should be visible, should be transparent, because that could create more trust in what you do with these data.
So what do you all think? Does every use require consent? Peter, Sarah, what do you think?
I certainly do so, because for me, consenting to my data processing is informational self-determination. When I go to the doctor, already now, I ask them, are you sharing the data with anybody? And I don't want that. not only for for insurance reasons, that's one point, but I just don't want anybody to know about my health. What I could imagine is to consent to have an anonymized substrate of my condition to be put to a space where researchers and also companies can mine generally health data, and where strict technical rules of anonymization and also legal rules apply, so that I'm not re-identified and that insurers can't understand my data. But under other conditions, and even if I contribute my data to research, I think many people would do that under these conditions. But I want to be asked.
Okay.
And I think other people like you also want to be asked.
You would disagree, Peter? Please.
Yes, I would disagree. The answer is simply that it's not always subject to consent, but other rules do apply, and this may be sometimes consent. But you need to be paying attention to the purpose for which data have been collected. And that is not a mathematical test, but it requires profound balancing of interest and accountability there. Under current law, there are some innocent uses and sometimes some problematic uses which require even more accountability. That's under current law. Now, if you have agreed, and in the context of research that often happens, that data are for this research only, then breaching that trust would make it unacceptable. But just another example, you mentioned data being inferred. Well, the principles we have in Europe have considered collection in other ways for a long time. This is an example of a collection from other sources. And then, of course, from that moment on, the accountability applies. So I do see a much more final example, contracts. And there are many real contractual relations which set the terms within which data can be used. And they need to be respected as well. So there is a more developed menu of options, and I recognize that this is philosophical, it's also cultural and constitutional in a number of EU and OECD member states, where there is a heavy emphasis on informational self-determination. I would say that ensuring adequate user control, our control, is certainly a very important policy objective, but I would not buy into it being the central principle of data protection.
I don't think I've heard you right. That's relatively radical.
No, it's not, because no, this is something which I think we have agreed on in the EU and also in OECD, and I keep saying that again, since 1981. And the European EU Charter of Fundamental Rights requires legitimacy, but it says either on consent or on another legitimate basis. And there are 5 of them. I don't bore you with the details. So it's about making this system work. You need to have transparency, you need to have legitimacy, you need to have purpose recognition, you need to have accountability, and then you need to be having enforcement.
Right. So are the individuals no longer the loci of control in terms of privacy? Are you okay with that?
At the moment.
Well, that's true. But of course, if I understand Peter, there's going to be a whole swath of activities that businesses can do that, if they meet other standards of legitimacy, should be acceptable, even though the individual has not given his or her consent.
I'm not sure whether you understood Peter Hustings or whether I misunderstood him. I think I can't imagine that Peter Hustings is against informed consent. I think, as far as I understand you, Peter, you're just outlining, and I'm completely with you, that beyond informed consent, there are, of course, other mechanisms Like, for example, that there are some areas where it's not appropriate potentially to even ask informed consent, or that there is accountability on the side of companies that comes in addition to the informed consent.
Why don't I give one or two examples of real life applications that we could then talk and see how this would actually fall in the marketplace. So search engine queries. We interact with a search engine and we're looking for something. And so a researcher has an interesting idea. They're going to look for searches of known symptoms of an ailment. They're going to look over, say, the last 5 years of searches in North America. Okay. And they're going to look for searches of a known ailment. Call it, I don't know, hyperglycemia, okay? And then you're going to look for searches of one drug, right? And that drug will be pravastatin, right? A blood thinner. And then you're going to look for searches of another drug, and the drug is going to be an antidepressant. And then you're going to look for searches of both drugs in unison, because if you do that and the symptoms, and you see to what degree searches for not just one drug and symptoms, or searches for the other drug and symptoms, but both drugs together and the symptoms, you might be able to spot an adverse drug interaction, a side effect that might not be on the label when the drug was approved, that when you take two drugs together creates a problem that the pharmaceutical companies and regulators didn't know about. Would that be allowed? The individual who was going through the search engine never gave the consent to do this. However, there's a great public benefit of this. Peter, what do you think? Sarah, others?
I'm not shocked, not at all. And just to reassure Sarah and others in the room, I'm very much in favor of free, informed, specific, and explicit consent when you need it. If you call it, if it's consent, call it consent, make it consent. But this example shows that there are many other situations where there is legitimacy other than subject to consent. And this is something we have envisaged long before. But you call it research. Let's call it research, analytics in the research type. I would be prepared to give space for innovative research, subject to some limitations. And if it comes to using the conclusions of the research, then say, here we have to think twice. And so if you make it so attractive that you actually say, well, you're going to apply this, then I think you are really exceeding the slippery slope.
But wait a minute, but so this is, of course, a real situation. It was published last year in the Public Library of Science. Of course, if we had this finding that there is actually a sort of drug that's actually creating another problem, that's creating a disease, a new disease by taking two drugs in unison, surely we should apply that research.
Oh yes,
right?
Yes, but that's why you publish the outcomes. If it's sincere research, you publish it. But I would not see the results of this insight then applied in real time, so to speak, and say, oh, now this user, who I know has all these characteristics, we're going to treat differently. I think that is the inherent risk of applied algorithms on the net, that they are inclusive, exclusive, etc.
If we could save that person's life, should we not on grounds of privacy?
In the commission, you need 5,000 lives.
What a
Don't
tempting question. I'm not going to answer.
Can I try to move the ball forward
go
on
for
that
it.
one? Because it's a very interesting example, and just so this isn't about rhetoric or it isn't about rules or whatnot. Let's move the ball forward just a little bit on that and say, who decides what is legitimate research? If I could just draw and this is not for rhetorical purposes at all, but if I could say, just using your exact layout of wouldn't it be interesting if this research could be done when you enter the following 5 terms over a period of time? Well, what if we did that for, I knew the secret 5 words that every terrorist looks for. And so we could identify other things that terrorists look for. And I'm not trying to be provocative. I'm just trying to ask, who decides when that kind of research can take place? Is there an ethical review board at, say, Google or at Microsoft for its search engine or Yahoo that says, well, these are legitimate purposes and these are not? And I'd like to, the unfortunate thing about this discussion is that we haven't got enough to the interesting applications of big data and the governance issues that arise. So it isn't about consent necessarily, but it is about who decides what is good and what is not. And even when you get into anonymous data, location data, anonymized location data, which I never understood that notion because you always go up to the same place every night, I hope. And there's an example of, say, TomTom selling its data or giving its data to, if I recall correctly, the Dutch police that allowed the police to identify where people were speeding. TomTom users weren't consulted, but you could say, well, look, it's anonymous data. But they were angry nonetheless because they weren't consulted in the actual use, even though it might not have had personal data. And so as you get to the governance issues, so say that there's a great medical research, what if I don't approve of one of the companies that's doing the research? Or what if I do not approve of the purpose of that medical research? It might save thousands of lives, but it's something that I religiously disagree with. What are the mechanisms for making these decisions? And if we say our current laws don't work because they focus on the wrong things, at least we have a legal framework around which we can have these debates. We haven't created those legal frameworks to have these debates around big data. And I guarantee you, because of the incapability of the US to pass a law of any nature, we're not going to see anything happen for the next decade, and big data is going to continue to grow.
It's not just the US. I think Europe has some new policies that are moving forward.
I think we're making, if we speak, do you refer to the data protection review
I
or
do,
something
but
else?
In particular, I want to just sharpen it by saying, to what degree do you feel that the new revisions are more permissive than in the past for novel big data uses? But however, as someone who thinks broadly about this, to what degree are some of the risks that the new regulations might obstruct creative uses of big data?
Well, I hear what you say, and I fully agree that legislation is not the way to regulate innovation. But you need safeguards to make innovation successful. And the frameworks which I see being delivered in the European Union by the first half of next year will be a great facilitator also for the kind of things you say, by drawing lines between what is acceptable and what not acceptable. It will not answer everything, of course not, but it will help to steer the developments in the right direction. So yes, all those new, it will address the issues and then we'll go to the next level of applying them. And that will facilitate the use of information technology in a range of areas. And so it's a condition for applying those things. And I think we're on our way to do that quite well. I've used every moment possible to contribute to making it work in the right direction.
Is there any sort of formal policy review mechanism built into the legislation so that if you find that it's not attaining the goal that you aspire to it, that you can actually, you formally have a mechanism to open up the debate and tinker with the rules?
I'm sure that will be part of it when it's adopted, because it's a normal practice to review this every
It's also
5
called
years.
Parliament.
Well,
Yes, of course,
Okay,
but,
fair enough, but
You know, we have these rules
And
that
we will-
existed up until 9/11, and then lo and behold, these rules didn't get in the way.
We
Not
have also-
hypothetical. There was a database directive that Europe said was going to create a burgeoning data industry and database industry in Europe. They created a property right around the database. And of course, if you look at the data market, however you want to define it, in Europe versus in America, America is light years ahead and Europe is struggling. So in fact, it's not the first time that there has been great aspirations around legislation and it has failed to materialize in practice.
Well, let's not do the blame game. I was just about to say, that there is also courts, there is increasing litigation, and also in difficult issues. You see the highest courts in the European Union taking strong stands in favor of protecting privacy and data. Data retention is an example. But look, this is part of the mechanism. Our societies are adjusting to these new phenomena. That's urgent. It's essential also for the take-up of new services. And don't underestimate that the right to privacy has been drilled into our DNA in Europe. You cannot just blow this away. You have to include it to make it successful. And your book, Ken, which I read with very great interest, and some of the questions we have here are reactions to the overemphasis in US discussions on notice and consent since the 90s, which was a very slippery thing, and consent was something, everything happening after the publication of a privacy policy. Well, that is of course underestimating. And if you say that we have to move to emphasizing use, that's the next step. But you should not think that consent does not play an important role in the whole menu. You also should not underestimate the role of strategic regulators. And we see this now emerging. We see cross-border cooperation. We see the FTC joining debate on issues of great harm. All that is very welcome. And I think we'll see much more in the coming years. Therefore, you need to have good frameworks. And I include the US, and they finally come to something, because we need to do this transatlantically.
Andy, it looks like you.
Well, I find privacy to be essential, particularly, but we're talking about one side of the equation. I'm wondering if you permit me just a bit, because let's assume, and that could be a big assumption given the conversation we've been having, that we get the privacy regime right and everyone's happy. I'm curious about the security side. How do you protect this? Let me just give you, we love statistics here at the OECD. I just want to give you a statistic from the UK announced last week that 81% of large UK organizations suffered a security breach last year. Holy camole. I mean, that's a lot. And I presume Microsoft wasn't amongst these, but I'd be interested to hear Eric and others' reactions. What are the policies we need to put in place to make the data secure? Because ultimately, what's going to run the internet economy is trust. Privacy is a part of that, but so is security.
Thank you for the question, Andrew. This is a question we've had, for many, many years, and we've also been and said, very clearly our commitment with regards to security for many years. Security for us is security by design, security by default, security also, by deployment. So when it comes to designing the products, it's already embedded in that. So if you take, some of our products that are still used today, they have not been necessarily developed at a time we had so many, let's say, security issues. So that's why we are developing now the technology to enable people to have their data and systems and completely secured and safe. So I am not surprised when you say 80% sounds very high, but I'm not surprised. I'm not surprised because companies, together with companies like Microsoft, but not only Microsoft, needs to take actions to secure their systems and their data. So we provide technology and products, but they have to partner with companies like Microsoft to deploy these technologies to secure their systems and data. That's a collaboration that needs to happen. And yeah, it's not happening all the time. We are investing not only in the product, but also in the deployment to make it happen. So security is top priority for Microsoft. Again, to build that trustworthy environment, which is a combination of data privacy and security.
Yes, and then Sarah.
The security is a mess, unfortunately. My friend Casper Bowden just found a little factoid that was in a report that then got deleted very quickly that showed, it was a study on cloud and cloud security. And one of the questions was asking IT managers, how much confidence do you have in the security of the data held by your company, or outsourced by your company to a cloud provider? And these IT managers thought that, I think it's 3/4 or 2/3 of them, thought that the data held in the cloud was secured with encryption. But it can't be. Not for cloud processing. Cloud storage, sure, but cloud processing, it isn't. And the fact that IT managers didn't know that means that we have a very serious problem. And related to that, security is no easier now than it was 20 years ago. Unlike protecting privacy has advanced a little bit despite government's interests. Security really isn't, and that's partly because of government's interests too. So long as governments are maintaining arsenals of zero-day attacks and weaknesses and vulnerabilities in software and not telling companies or not telling the general public about these vulnerabilities so that they can get repaired, we're not going to have cybersecurity.
Sarah, do you want to?
Yeah, I still have some hope though, because as you said, both of you, I think privacy by design and security by design is something that is now coming up, and these are methodologies that help during the system development life cycle to really think in detail about what threats could occur and how to put controls and mitigation strategies against every single potential threat. And if we're coming from 20 years of, or even longer, of release early, release often. And there are still a lot of companies operating this way. And as this mantra is abolished and we move really to a different style of development of systems, I think we can anticipate a lot of attacks. And now I come to the security point. Anne Kavukian from Canada often says that there is something like zero sum, so that you can have both privacy and security. And I also still believe in that to some extent, because I think that if you have transparent mechanisms, for example, of anonymity revocation, once there is a legitimate reason to follow a criminal, then you can basically open the code and open the transaction data that has been encrypted before. But this is really acting on an individual basis, and it would mean that there is a different security and surveillance regime than we have today, because today it's like everybody looks up the data that they need in the police departments.
About these figures of security breaches, I'm not surprised about these high numbers. In fact, I think in the UK, for reasons which are now irrelevant, there has been systematic analysis also of the causes of those breaches. And if you look back what made them happen, it is striking to see that there was everything between stupidity and a lack of professionality. It was not just that standard things failed to work. It was simply stupidity and a lack of practice. So we need to be much better, and that's a strong message to many companies, also governments, much better in information management. And Sarah just put her finger on another thing. Say, if you produce a car, there are 100,000 rules you have to comply with, and if there is a part missing, you see recalls, etc. That's not the way the internet works. And that is a source of vulnerability, which of course we also have to address. And my bid would be, we need to talk to the developers and to the creeds they believe in. We need to make sure that at that point, privacy is part of their thinking. It's not at present. And if you have a kid developing an app, he needs to know not about intellectual property to monetize the invention, but also about privacy built in. And that these causes have to be addressed as well.
It's true, but of course there's a conundrum with that, which is just like with a car warranty, the car manufacturer has to know who you are so that they can issue the recall. Likewise with software, we would find that if we were to create the same sort of policy, which seems eminently reasonable, we would also have to know where that software is. We would lose anonymity, on the other hand, for people who want to use that software. We just have to live with that.
Yeah, no, I'm not criticizing this practice, and but it is true that we have got used to patches all the time, and that is not the way to really have coherent, coherent systematic security. So there is vulnerability all over.
Okay. Our audience.
And this is where technology and innovations are taking us to a new world. This new world is a world of cloud, which is moving from what we've been experiencing the last 20, 30 years, where we upgraded our systems, in a world we are going to update. And that, as you use the cloud, then it will be updated on a constant basis. So you will have, certainly more, let's say, security, just because your system will be updated all the time, without you investing to upgrade it. The cloud is bringing that benefit to companies. So we are going to a much better world. I'm not naive. I am not naive. Okay, I remain, the feet on the ground. But we are getting to this world.
I was only considering the fact that a company that made its fortune in desktop software is now extolling the virtues of the cloud. It does show that this is a different company than it was a decade ago. That's all.
I started by telling you that we are all learning.
We are all.
We have to be very humble. So,
Quite. Speaking of learning and humility, this is the OECD, and we have an audience in front of us, and there's questions. So let's go right to them. Let me just hit an order, and then let's ask all three questions. We'll respond. 1, 2, 3, 4.
So hello, I'm a security consultant. So my daily life is attacking companies and trying to find out what their vulnerabilities are. And we are tomorrow at the Idea Factory. I'm a little bit disappointed about the discussion because it's a little bit not what I expected. Anyways, since we all know this is very disruptive what we experience now, and the policy making around that is very, very bad in my point of view. And but in my point of view, there's also not the right discussion. For example, just one example. If we talk about privacy, this is actually tied to identity. So what does it mean for policies? It means that we need to think about what identity actually means and how I need to be able as a citizen to change my identity just to make big data based on my identity useless. So this is like, in the future we need some policies which are not tied, like we are dependent on technologies, we cannot do anything against it. So yeah, just live with it. We can do things. And this is like something which I find a little bit weird, that you don't discuss what's actually possible and on what level we need to discuss, and not it's not fixable by the technology itself. For example, DNT is dead, so it doesn't work. Yeah? It never worked really, and now it is really dead because nobody really supports it anymore. So it got the standard by the WC3. So we really need to think about the foundation of the way where the disruption actually happens and change the policies there. So I mean, we are talking about better policies for better lives. So that is actually something where I wish the discussion would move to.
Okay.
More comment than a question.
Yeah, no, thank you. Let's take a couple more questions or comments, and then we're going to make some responses. There was a gentleman in the back. He's disappeared? Oh, no, he's there. Let's do second, third, fourth. Please.
Sure. So my name is Joseph. I'm here with NATO Canada, although I represent my own opinion. So we've spoken about various security technologies that will be developed in the coming years that will allow us to get rid of, in many ways, the so-called fetishization of technology. I like that phrase. However, what we will also have in the upcoming years, and certainly in the upcoming decades, is greater developments, not in security technology, but in technology that blends the lines between humanity and the world of machines. And I speak, of course, of many so-called science fiction projects which are being developed by Google and other corporations. We have Google Glass, we have smartwatches, we have all of the crazy projects of Ray Kurzweil at Google, so-called transhumanistic technologies. And this trend, in my opinion, is inevitable, and it's inevitable simply for the reason that technology sells, and technology will always sell. And so I don't think that we can combat if we wish to combat the fetishization of technology, we can combat this fetishization with new technology, because technology in many respects has already reached the point where it has outpaced us in terms of the market. Now, where does this bring us? This brings us to a new problem. And this brings us to a problem, especially with new technologies that blend humanism and machines in the realm of health and healthcare. If you have DNA, for example, that will be patented, you've already had a few cases in the US. These projects will be pioneered by private entities, by corporations. We've spoken today about NSA infiltration. We've spoken about various intel organizations that can hack into the projects of corporations and use big data, but we haven't spoken so much about unaccountable actors. We haven't spoken about hackers in China. We haven't spoken about unaccountable groups in Russia right now, for example. We haven't spoken about these actors that may also access big data in corporations such as Microsoft, which will become increasingly problematic as transhumanistic technologies develop. And so my question is, how do we address this problem? What are the policy solutions that you see forthcoming to address these specific problems? Thank you.
Thanks. We're running short on time. I see. I'm going to go for all those whose hands have been up already. Okay, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. Okay. Please.
Okay. Hello. Oh, okay. My name is Sung-Ju Kang from Korea. Actually, I have two comments regarding the privacy. First one, recently, actually, Korean government, as you see, actually, just though Andy actually mentioned that several of the card companies, they leaked actually the customers' the personal data. So actually, based on my kind of investigation, actually, technological solution, as Sarah and some people said, it's not so effective to protect the privacy. So managerial issue is much more important. So actually, recently, the Parliament of Korea, actually, they passed a law, actually, if they violate or they leak the personal data, actually, it's gonna be CEO issue. So CEO should be kind of punished. It's kind of criminal actually punishment. So actually, those kind of managerial kind of measures is much effective. And another second actual comment is privacy is kind of global issue, because nowadays Chinese people actually they sell actually the personal data, actually Korean people's personal data, actually officially, actually they sell, $10, $20, actually suppose name and bank account and mobile phone numbers. So actually we are suffering some kind of conflicts between two countries. The law enforcement people, actually they have some kind of dialogue, how to protect and how to make some kind of punishment, this kind of transaction. So OECD or United Nations or some kind of Privacy International or whatever, actually we need to have some kind of, a privacy round or whatever called this kind of global collaboration is required. Thank you.
Great. Thank you very much. Please.
Yes. Hello. I'm Roberto Martinez, and I come from the new telecommunications and media regulator in Mexico. And so it has been brought to our attention that increasingly there is, for reasons related to network security or network robustness in the broadband sphere, that there's a need for telco operators to tap into personal data and traffic information that increasingly overlaps with personal data. And so my question is, what's your vision, what's your take on the future of this argument that the deep packet inspection, that there's definitely no way around looking at your data for the sake of keeping networks growing, bandwidth being assured? And we think our first reaction is that line of argumentation is not well founded, but still I think we need to collaborate closer, telco regulators and privacy policymakers. Thank you.
Okay. So we are essentially out of time, but I will like to let all of the panelists have a closing remark or insight. Hopefully that might address one of these, of the myriad of extremely good questions that we've had. If there's anything that you feel either that has not been raised so far that ought to have been, or to respond to one of the points that have been raised, you can do so and just simply put your insight out as quickly as possible, and then I'll make a summation and thank you. Who would like to take the first challenge? Andrew.
Yeah, it's late. I'll be very fast. I want to pick up on the comment by our Korean colleague, which I think is a good one, that we shouldn't just rely on technology. This is not going to happen. And so one of the things that makes me most pleased on our revised privacy guidelines is the revision in there about data breach notification, because I think this is an important mechanism for trying to get the market to work here and get companies to be a little bit more rigorous about things.
Okay, thank you. Peter would like to?
Yes, I think there are a number of normative questions, legitimacy issues. Then you also need to invest in managerial practices. That point I would fully agree with. Technology is part of it, and we should bring it together. But one line on the deep packet inspection, but I make it more general. We see references to traffic management, and that's in the context of net neutrality. What I hear is that operators want to be able to follow messages all the time. Some of it is innocent, some of it totally unacceptable. I think the deeper you go, the more problematic it gets. So your deep packet inspection, I don't buy it.
Okay, thank you. Sarah?
Yes, I would like to make a comment on one of the questions, and that's my last comment, on the transhumanistic movement and the people at Google and co. who publicly write in the context of the singularity that humans are just an episode in the evolution, and our time is over now, and we can tear out the heart. That's the director of product engineering of Google who wrote that. And I'm deeply opposed to that because I really believe, like you, in the power of human beings and our capability to learn, and also the capability of technology to support us learning and to empower us against the transhumanists. And I call this vision the ethical machine.
Thank you.
Yes, so just rebounding on your point with regards to security, I will not answer your statement because it was more of a statement, but just to build on what you said, you're going to visit Microsoft Factory tomorrow. It's just proof point that we are very open and very transparent, and we want to set the standard for any stakeholder in the world to be as transparent as we are, to build that trustworthy environment that we need if we want to build this world, this new world, or this digital world, which again is bringing lots of benefits. So we shouldn't, I think, we should rebalance the way we look at it. There are much, much, much more benefits than risks and challenges. That being said, we need to address all stakeholders, including government. And as you know, some companies like Microsoft have a dialogue, a strong dialogue, I'm not sure that it's the right word, by the way, with the US government with regard to surveillance strategies and policies, which needs to be completely, revisited. So yes, all stakeholders we need to work hard and fast, because there are lots of benefits that we can reap now, for, I would say, improved society. So that's, again, transparency is absolutely key, and we'll set the standard, and please challenge us.
Gus.
The identity, security, authentication issue is going to get more complicated when we have machine-to-machine authentication. Do we want that to always be strong? Do we want some fuzziness in all of this? If we allow fuzziness, that allows malicious actors, sometimes governments, or often governments, to interfere as well. It's going to get messier despite the technology, and I look forward to that. That's going to be a fascinating discussion over the next decade. The one thing that we haven't spoken about, and obviously not going to talk about it too much, is the discrimination angle. The White House report that came out on Friday raised the issue of discrimination when it comes to big data. As I said, the first time Ken and I had a conversation about big data many years ago, I think 4 years ago now, privacy is part of the problem. The discrimination angle is going to be the one that breaks it, or breaks it open.
Okay, thank you. Let me make a final closing remark, and then I'll let you go, which is that I think the one thing that you can tell from this panel is that it's deeply unfair to have you raise your hand and answer a binary question, privacy protection or not, or more importantly, big data benefits outweigh or not. Because I think, firstly, what we've learned is that the case in favor of big data has just not been made. We really don't know what these benefits are, but we get a sense that they're very good. But secondly, in terms of the harms, they're probably not ripe yet. We've been talking about I think it's interesting that we've dangled out big data and we've talked about privacy worries that are in the here and now, not in what's to play for in the future. However, the good news is that the OECD has lots of forums, one every year, so I'm sure we'll be back. Thanks a lot.
Thank you.